The burgundy dress still hung near the back of my closet, a shade deeper now with age, but its silk folds held memories too heavy to ignore. I hadn't touched it in nearly 2 years yet. Today my fingers reached for it instinctively, brushing over the seams like tracing the outline of an old scar. I wore it to Brielle's high school graduation, standing beside her as she clutched her diploma, cheeks flushed with pride. She'd whispered that day, "You look like a queen mom." I wore it again when she landed her first marketing job in Chicago, when she insisted I sit at the head of the table like the guest of honor. And once more, the night she was promoted to team lead, she clinked her wine glass against mine and said, "I wouldn't be here without you." I slipped it on again now, smoothing the fabric over my hips, with hands that remembered her as a child, feet pressed against my lap, asking if she could be an astronaut and a fashion designer. 3 weeks had passed since our last conversation, if you could call it that. A confrontation, really. Brielle had wanted me to contribute $70,000 toward what she called a dream wedding, a beachfront venue in Santa Barbara, flown-in florals and imported tile backsplash for the venue bathroom that, according to her Pinterest board, photographed like heaven. I'd offered $15,000, enough to host something elegant, intimate. She'd stared at me with the same expression she once reserved for rusted thrift store jewelry I tried to gift her as a child. Disappointment, barely veiled by politeness. "You're sitting on money you don't even need," she'd said, voice clipped, controlled. "And I'm the selfish one." She ended the call before I could respond. Now I stood alone in front of my full-length mirror, the burgundy dress falling into place like it had been waiting. The silence between us had stretched so long, it began to feel like its own kind of message. But then yesterday, the call came. Her voice was lighter than I remembered. "I've been thinking, Mom. Maybe we both said things we didn't mean. Can we talk over dinner?" She suggested Bellagio's on River Street, the same restaurant her father had taken me to for our 25th anniversary. I said yes. 3 weeks before the dinner invitation, Brielle stood in my kitchen with a glossy binder in her hands and a tone I hadn't heard since she was 16, and wanted a used BMW instead of the rusted Toyota her father found on Craigslist. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from the tea I'd brewed that morning, but the tension in the air flattened everything. $70,000, she said, laying the binder open on the counter like a real estate pitch. It covers the venue, the planner travel expenses, photographer custom floral arches, and the first deposit on the honeymoon package. Her voice was bright, rehearsed, almost businesslike. I stood across from her, still in my slippers, blinking at the column of numbers that didn't feel like they belonged to a wedding, but a startup launch. "I see," I said. I kept my voice even. "It's beautiful, Brielle. But 70,000 it's a great deal of money." She smiled wide and false. "You have it." "I do," I admitted. "Because your father worked 30 years and died thinking that money would make my retirement safe. Because I clipped coupons for half my life and drove the same car for 12 years. Not so I could pretend I'm a silent partner in your wedding." Her expression flickered. "So that's a no. I'll give you 15, I said. "It's what I gave your cousin when she got married. It's fair. It's generous." She snapped the binder shut. 15 won't cover the lighting. Do you even know what an event like this takes? You think I'm being excessive, but this isn't just a party. This is our future. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized she meant it. That this wedding, this image, this show had become the currency she'd traded love and sense and stability for. And I didn't recognize the girl in front of me anymore. "I think your future is going to need more than imported orchids and a drone videographer." She crossed her arms. "You're selfish." The words struck me harder than I let her see. I'd been called tired, strict, too cautious, too practical, but never selfish. I was the woman who packed her lunch to afford braces, who took overtime shifts instead of vacations, who made every Halloween costume by hand when we couldn't afford store-bought sparkle. I'm not giving you $70,000, Brielle, I said, gently but without apology. She didn't speak. She walked out. No hug, no thank you. No, I'll think about it. She blocked my number 2 hours later. I found out when I tried to send her a recipe she once loved, and the text bounced back undelivered. I didn't hear from her again until the phone rang yesterday. Her name glowing on the screen pulled something taut inside me. I answered, unsure of what to expect. She wanted dinner, said she'd been thinking, that we should talk. She even picked the restaurant, Bellagio's. The call came just after 10 in the morning. I was in the garden, trimming back the last of the rose bushes before the weather shifted when the phone vibrated in my pocket. Her name lit the screen like a flare. I answered with more caution than grace. Hi, Mom. Brielle said, her voice softer than I expected. There was a hesitation on the other end, like she was choosing her next words carefully. I've been thinking about what you said. About everything, really. Maybe we were both a little reactive. I didn't speak right away. I let her keep talking. Landon and I talked. And I miss you. I don't want us to stay like this. I thought maybe we could get dinner. Just talk. Nothing heavy. It would have been easier if she'd sounded cold or demanding. But this version of her, the one who once left sticky notes in my purse that said, "You're the best mom ever," was harder to resist. Dinner, I repeated. That sounds unexpected. I thought Bellagio's, she added. You always liked it there, right? It feels safe. Safe. That was the word she used. And maybe I wanted to believe her. Maybe part of me missed her too, not the woman with numbers in a binder, but the daughter who used to sit on the counter and ask for frosting before dinner. Bellagio's was where Harold and I had celebrated our 25th anniversary. White tablecloths, soft jazz, and a quiet little booth where he'd held my hand the entire meal without saying much at all. It had felt like a sanctuary then, like the world had narrowed to just us. I hesitated for another beat, then agreed. She sounded pleased, said she'd make a reservation. 6:30 tomorrow night. After we hung up, I sat back on the porch step and watched the breeze move through the garden. Something in me stirred, cautious but not cold. Maybe she had changed. Maybe motherhood was softening her edges already. I told myself it was a start. But deep down, I wondered if it was something else entirely. I pressed the dress and laid it across my bed. Bellagio's hadn't changed. The brick facade still glowed warm in the early evening light, the same ivy tracing up the windows, the same soft hum of conversation inside. For a moment, I let myself believe this would be like it used to be. Clinking glasses, shared laughter, something tender between us. I checked in with the hostess and followed her past candlelit tables until I spotted Brielle already seated. She looked beautiful, radiant even. Pregnancy had softened her face in the way it softens women who carry both life and ambition. Her dress was crisp, high-end. She stood to hug me, and for a brief second, the familiar perfume on her collarbone made my throat tighten. "You look lovely, Mom," she said. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, too aware of the slight tremor in her hands as we sat. "I'm glad you called. Landon's on his way." "He just wrapped up a meeting," she said lightly, as if we hadn't gone 3 weeks without speaking. Within minutes, Landon arrived, and he wasn't alone. 3 men followed behind him in tailored suits, each holding a briefcase. The energy shifted like a current beneath the table. Celeste Landon said, smiling with the ease of someone used to disarming a room. "Thanks for coming. These are some colleagues of mine. We wanted to go over a few things with you." My pulse picked up slow but steady. Colleagues Brielle kept her eyes on the linen napkin in her lap, They just have some paperwork we thought you might want to see. One of the men, silver-haired and smooth-voiced, leaned forward. Mrs. Marlowe, I'm Stephen Klein, estate attorney. What we're proposing is a simple power of attorney transfer. For your convenience. It would allow Landon and Brielle to help manage your affairs should the need arise. I looked at them all then, at my daughter. The need, I'm 62, not 85. Of course, Landon said quickly. But it's just practical. With everything going on, the baby coming, and you living alone, we thought I held up a hand. So this dinner wasn't about reconnecting. It was about control. Brielle finally looked up. Her eyes didn't waver. You've been under a lot of stress, Mom. Forgetting things. Getting overwhelmed. We just want to make sure the baby grows up in a stable environment. By taking over my accounts. My home. Stephen slid a manila envelope across the table. All it requires is your signature. Just here and here. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. And if I don't? I asked. Brielle's voice was low. Then you won't be part of this baby's life. The clatter of silverware and muted jazz faded. All I could hear was the sound of something tearing quietly in my chest. I reached for my purse. Fingers steady. I excused myself without raising my voice, folding my napkin neatly beside the untouched glass of Pinot Noir. Brielle didn't stop me. Landon gave a small nod as if I were excusing myself, to powder my nose rather than stepping away from the edge of a cliff they'd constructed beneath me. In the quiet hallway near the restrooms, I pulled out my phone and dialed Elias. He answered on the second ring, breath slightly clipped, probably mid-shift. Mom, everything okay? No, I said. But it will be. Can you come to Bellagio's now? He didn't ask for details. He just said, I'm on my way. I hung up and scrolled to the next number. Diane Krall. We hadn't spoken in weeks, but she'd told me once off the record, in the way old friends sometimes offer protection, without making a promise that if Brielle ever tried anything that smelled like coercion, I should call. She answered with the same dry authority I remembered. Celeste, I think tonight's the night. Are you safe for now? I'm on my way. Stay seated. Say little. Touch nothing. I thanked her and ended the call. Back at the table, I slid into my chair as if nothing had shifted, as if I hadn't just set two things in motion that would change the entire conversation. Landon raised his glass. Everything all right? Just needed some air, I said. Stephen nudged the envelope again. Whenever you're ready. I looked down at it and smiled softly like someone remembering a line from a play they once saw in a theater that no longer stands. I'm not quite ready yet, I said, folding my hands on the table. But someone else might be. Brielle glanced at me confused. Landon frowned. I kept my eyes steady, my voice level, my heart quiet beneath the surface. Whatever storm they'd prepared for, I wasn't going to give it to them. I was waiting for the weather to change. It didn't take long. 17 minutes, maybe 18. Just enough time for Landon to cycle through his patient smile twice and for Brielle to begin tapping her manicured nails against the base of her water glass. I sat, silent, calm hands folded, like I was waiting on bread service instead of reinforcements. Elias appeared, first still in his hospital scrubs, his ID badge clipped to his chest, and his hair slightly askew from what must have been a fast drive. He moved through the dining room like he'd been here 100 times scanning faces until his eyes found mine. Mom, he said. Got your message. I stood briefly to greet him. Thank you for coming. He looked at Brielle. Hey, Brie. She blinked. You're working tonight. Not anymore? He said, his voice clipped. What's going on? Landon, to his credit, tried to smooth the air. Elias, nice to see you. We were just discussing some estate matters with your mother. Elias picked up the envelope without asking and flipped through the pages. His movements were quick, exacting, and when he set the documents down, His expression had changed. Power of attorney, he asked, his voice low. Just a precaution, Brielle offered. For her benefit, Landon added, smiling. Elias didn't answer. He looked at me, jaw tense, then glanced toward the entrance. Diane Krall arrived like thunder without sound. Petite, silver-haired, in a blazer that fit like armor, and a briefcase she'd had longer than Brielle had been alive. She came straight to our table without hesitation. Evening, she said, placing the briefcase on the table. I believe I was invited. Landon's smile faltered. Stephen Klein stood, but said nothing. This is a private dinner, Brielle said tightly. No, I corrected gently. This is a negotiation, and I don't do those without representation. Diane opened her case, pulled out a folder with my name embossed across the tab, and placed it beside their manila envelope. Elias leaned back in his chair. Arms crossed, eyes on Brielle now. You brought a lawyer, she asked me, disbelief creeping into her voice. I looked at her carefully. You brought 3. Diane opened her folder with the precision of someone who dismantled empires over lunch. She slid out a packet of crisp documents and laid them flat on the table between the untouched wine glasses and untouched intentions. As of 2 weeks ago, she said clearly Mrs. Marlowe's estate, including her home financial accounts and remaining life insurance assets, have been secured in an irrevocable trust. Stephen Klein shifted slightly in his seat. The younger man beside him, barely out of law school, judging by his posture, leaned forward like he was seeing a ghost. Irrevocable, Landon asked the word landing slower than his understanding. That's correct, Diane said. With Elias named as trustee until Mrs. Marlowe's passing and all decisions made at her discretion while she remains of sound mind, which for the record is not in dispute. Brielle's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Landon's jaw tightened. Furthermore, Diane continued, pulling out a second folder. We've gathered documentation regarding attempts to question Mrs. Marlowe's mental competency, including a visit to her primary care physician from someone posing as a concerned neighbor, inquiries into her financial accounts made by associates connected to Mr. Hart, and this part was particularly audacious, a private investigator canvassing her street. Landon tried to speak, but Diane didn't stop. You may want to advise your client, Mr. Klein, that coercion of an elder with the intent to gain financial control is not just unethical. It's criminal. I didn't need to say a word. The way Landon's color drained, the way Brielle looked anywhere but at me, it was enough. Elias looked down at the trust paperwork, then at me, and gave the faintest nod. We were no longer on the defensive. The floor had shifted. I believe this ends any discussion of power of attorney, Diane said, sliding the papers back into her folder. No, I said quietly. This begins something else entirely. The silence at the table had shifted. No longer tense or anticipatory, it had weight now, the kind that settles in after something irreversible has been spoken aloud. I turned to Brielle. Her face was pale. Her lips parted just slightly, as though she was still waiting for a script she hadn't memorized to save her. If you want to talk, I said quietly, really. Talk not about money or documents or access, but about what's left between us. You know how to find me. But you come alone. No papers? No agendas? She didn't respond. Just blinked slowly, like something was recalibrating behind her eyes. Then I turned to Landon. You stay away from my family. Stay away from my son. Stay away from my house. I won't ask again. He started to protest, some mix of outrage and spin catching in his throat, but I didn't stay to hear it. I stood, and Diane stood with me. Elias was already collecting his coat, slipping the trust papers into his bag like a surgeon securing a wound. We walked past the white tablecloths and flickering candlelight without a backward glance. The maitre d' offered me a tight, understanding nod. I gave it back. Outside, the evening air felt sharper, cleaner, like the weight I'd carried inside had stayed behind on the linen napkin I'd folded so carefully beside an untouched plate. Diane murmured something about following up tomorrow. Elias took my elbow without asking. We walked down River Street together, the lights of Bellagio's fading behind us, the quiet footsteps of my son beside me. The only sound I needed. The ache in my chest had dulled, now replaced by something solid, something that held. The days after Bellagio's passed quietly, but not hollow. For the first time in months, I woke without the tightness in my chest. I still made my morning tea, still walked the garden path out back, but there was something new in the air, a stillness that wasn't emptiness, but space. June moved in next door a week later, widowed like me. A few years older, sharp-eyed and uninterested in small talk, unless it mattered. We met over a shared garbage bin and ended up talking on my porch for 2 hours. It didn't take long before we fell into rhythm morning coffee, late afternoon, check-ins, stories shared in pieces, then whole pages. She didn't ask about Brielle. She let me bring it up when I was ready. I started volunteering with a local support group for older adults facing financial manipulation. The first night I spoke, I told them my story without trembling. They listened and some nodded in that quiet, knowing way people do when their own pain is being translated aloud. Helping them helped me. Each session felt like laying another brick under my feet. I wasn't who I was before, but I was becoming someone worth knowing again. Elias called one evening, just as I was setting down a plate of warm cornbread June had left on my porch. His voice was even but softer than usual. She had the baby, he said. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. A girl. They named her Elena, my mother's name. He hesitated before continuing. Brielle asked me to tell you she'd like you to visit. Said visiting hours are open. She made it sound casual, but you know what she's really saying. I did. I heard it beneath every word. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter in careful, steady script. I told Brielle I was willing to meet Elena, that I wanted to know my granddaughter, but I would do so on clear terms. Any visit would take place with Elias present, and the moment finances or the past entered the conversation, I would leave. I sealed the envelope, addressed it in my neatest handwriting, and walked it to the mailbox before I could second-guess a single word. I loved the idea of that baby. I already did. But I had learned that love without boundaries is not a gift, it's a gateway. I joined the senior legal aid group full-time by spring. Diane asked me to speak at workshops, and I did, each time with more strength in my voice, less weight in my chest. I listened to others the way I once longed to be heard, and it changed something in me. Not just how I saw myself, but how I carried what had happened. June came to every public talk I gave. She always sat near the back, arms crossed, nodding when I hit the parts that mattered most. At home, I kept busy with purpose, not just routine. Volunteering, mentoring, gardening without needing silence to soothe me. My peace wasn't fragile anymore, it held. One afternoon, while organizing my closet, I passed the burgundy dress. I didn't reach for it, didn't pause. I simply moved on past it toward a lighter blouse that felt like now, not then. I no longer wore memories to prove my worth to someone else. I dressed to meet myself where I was stronger, steadier, and still standing. Some women survive betrayal. Some rise through it. But the most dangerous are the ones who learn to build after they've been broken.